I remember it vividly. I've never seen anything like this. That's what David Holmes said under oath on page 54 of his deposition transcript, released tonight as the breaking news story of the night. It is about the incident that has made David Holmes an important witness in the impeachment investigation of President Donald J. Trump. David Holmes is an important witness who we did not even know existed at this time last week. The first public reference made to David Holmes was in Wednesday's hearing when Ambassador William Taylor shocked the hearing room and millions of viewers when he described a phone call from a restaurant in Ukraine to President Trump that David Holmes had overheard. But Ambassador Taylor did not reveal then David Holmes' name. He simply said it was a member of his staff who overheard the call. 2 days after Ambassador Taylor's testimony, David Holmes was describing that phone call under oath in a closed-door deposition on Friday. And on Friday night, that became our breaking news because we were able to report David Holmes' version of the phone call from his written opening statement, which NBC News had obtained on Friday. And now, tonight, we have the full transcript. The now famous phone call was made on a cell phone at a restaurant in Kyiv by the Trump ambassador to the European Union, Gordon Sondland, after Ambassador Sondland met with Ukraine's President Zelensky. Chairman Adam Schiff took David Holmes through that phone call, step by step. The chairman. Now, you said the president's voice was loud and recognizable, and Ambassador Sondland held the phone away from his head. Is that right, Mr. Holmes? Yes, sir. He sort of was waiting for him to come on, and then when he came on, he sort of winced and went like that a couple of times, the first couple of exchanges. He sort of winced, the chairman. He moved his head away from the phone, winced, and then moved the phone away from his ear because the volume was loud, the chairman. And you heard Ambassador Sondland greet the president and say he was calling from Kyiv, and then you could hear President Trump wanting to clarify that Ambassador Sondland was, in fact, in Ukraine. Mr. Holmes, yes, yes. You mean Ukraine? Yes, Ukraine. The chairman, and then you said President Zelensky on Ambassador Sondland went on to say that President Zelensky loves your ass, meaning that he loves the president. Mr. Holmes, yes, sir. The chairman. And then you could hear President Trump say, so he's going to do the investigation. Mr. Holmes, yes, sir. The chairman. And Sondland replied, he's going to do it. Mr. Holmes, yes. He said, oh, yeah, he's going to do it. The chairman. And then he went on to say, President Zelensky will do anything you ask him to. Mr. Holmes, yes. The chairman. And those are the words you heard to the best of your recollection. Mr. Holmes, yes, sir. The chairman. And you know, I think you said you have quite a clear recollection of that. It left an impression on you, did it? Mr. Holmes, this was an extremely distinctive experience in my Foreign Service career. I've never seen anything like this. Someone calling the president from a mobile phone at a restaurant and then having a conversation of this level of candor, colorful language. There's just so much about the call that was so remarkable that I remember it vividly. David Holmes will testify to all of this in public on Thursday morning, in a week in which the House Intelligence Committee will hear from 9 witnesses in morning and afternoon hearings. Gordon Sondland will testify the day before David Holmes on Wednesday morning. Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congressman Denny Heck of Washington. He is a member of the House Intelligence Committee. He attended David Holmes' under oath deposition. Also joining us, Jonathan Alter, columnist for the Daily Beast and an MSNBC political analyst covering his second impeachment. He was a younger man for that first one in the 1970s. And Norm Ornstein, congressional historian and resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, is with us. And Norm has watched all 3 of these impeachments that we've had from Nixon forward. Congressman Heck, let me ask you about this deposition we're getting. It was dramatic enough on Friday night when we read the opening statement in which he describes this phone call so clearly. But seeing the testimony that Chairman Schiff took him through and hearing his explanation of why he remembers it so vividly is all the more powerful. And I couldn't find in the transcript, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could not find any Republican members in any way shaking David Holmes on anything about that phone call.
Not for 1 nanosecond, Lawrence.
And what do you make of David Holmes' general credibility about the range of his testimony?
Well, I thought he was an excellent witness. Frankly, his revelation was jaw-dropping, namely that the president said, so words to the effect, so there's going to be an investigation. But there were a couple of other things there that were pretty stunning, too. As we've talked about the fact that we were having a conversation between Ambassador Sondland and President Trump on the terrace of a restaurant out in the open in Kiev, Ukraine, with no doubt Russian agents everywhere. But what I think was as offensive as anything was the callous disregard in which Mr. Holmes represented Ambassador Sondland's characterization of President Trump's regard for the Ukraine. He said he didn't give an expletive deleted about it, that he cared about the big stuff. And Mr. Holmes said, well, there's big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. And Ambassador Sondland said, no, big stuff like getting his investigations in effect. He didn't care. He doesn't care about Ukraine, this strategic ally, this vulnerable ally that is struggling to get on its feet as a thriving democracy and push back on malign intent and Russian aggression.
Well, it's a fair impression to have, watching Donald Trump from a distance, to just assert that he doesn't care about Ukraine, or he doesn't care about a whole host of things that we all seem to feel he doesn't care about. It's something else, I imagine, Congressman, to actually hear from someone who is quoting someone who was just on the phone with Donald Trump, who's saying, no, he doesn't give a crap about Ukraine.
Not his exact words, as you well know, Lawrence. You could have heard a pin drop during the deposition during that passage.
I'm going to read that passage now for our audience as it emerges in the actual deposition testimony and the questioning with the chairman. On Friday night, we had a version of this from the opening statement, but there's more here. The chairman. Now, what led you to believe that the president didn't give a crap, and I'm cleaning that up, a crap about Ukraine? That's an interesting way to start a question asking for feedback. Mr. Holmes, yeah, I'm not proud of my language, but the informal tone of the lunch and the language I had heard him, meaning Gordon Sondland, using in his call with the president, we were just sort of, two guys over lunch talking about stuff. And it seemed to me that that was the kind of language that he used. And so I, at that point, believed that it had been very difficult for us to get the president interested in what we were trying to do in Ukraine. Those are the words I chose, meaning that David Holmes asked Gordon Sondland that question, does he give a crap? The chairman. And Sondland agreed with you that the president did not give a crap about Ukraine. So his answer was to you, the president doesn't give a crap about Ukraine. Mr. Holmes, my recollection, he said, nope, not at all. Doesn't give a crap about Ukraine. He said he only cares about big things. The chairman, big things or big stuff? Mr. Holmes, big things, big stuff, big. The chairman, and you noted that there was big stuff going on in Ukraine, like a war with Russia. Mr. Holmes, yes. The chairman, and what did Ambassador Sondland say in reply? Mr. Holmes, he said, no, big stuff that matters to him, like this Biden investigation that Giuliani is pushing. The chairman. So Ambassador Sondland conveyed that the big stuff the president cared about was stuff that benefited the president, like the investigation into the Bidens. Mr. Holmes, that was my understanding. Yes. Norm Ornstein, that is under oath testimony by someone who was speaking to someone who just hung up the phone from the president of the United States.
Lawrence, with this and some of the other depositions that we've heard, there are more smoking guns here than there are at Wayne LaPierre's shooting range. If we put this into a larger context, we know that there was a complete orchestrated smear campaign to get Ambassador Yovanovitch out of there because she was fighting corruption in Ukraine. We know that as soon as she left, the so-called three amigos, Sondland, Ambassador Volker, and Rick Perry, stepped in to say they were in charge of the policy and that Rudy Giuliani, who had helped the smear campaign, was deeply involved. And we know that there was enormous pressure put on President Zelensky, including two things he wanted: a meeting with the president to reaffirm America's commitment to Ukraine and the aid package, and that it was held up, and it was held up despite the fact that every agency in the executive branch, except for Mick Mulvaney and OMB, wanted it released. This is so corrupt and so bad for America's national interest that it's just breathtaking.
And I want to read one more passage from the testimony, and this is about the security of this phone call, which I think, Congressman Heck, I'm sure had shocked you all to discover that there's an ambassador who's just making a cell phone call from anywhere, but from Ukraine, of all places. Let me just read how the details of that unfolded in the testimony. The chairman: did that cause you any concern about the security of that phone call, Mr. Holmes? It was surprising to me that yes. In my experience, generally, phone calls with the president are very sensitive and handled accordingly. The chairman: and making a cell phone call from Ukraine? Is there a risk of Russians listening in? Mr. Holmes, I believe at least 2 of the 3, if not all 3, of the mobile networks are owned by Russian companies or have significant stakes in those. We generally assume that mobile communications in Ukraine are being monitored. The chairman: and in fact, Ambassador Nuland's communications at one point had been monitored and released for political effect. Mr. Holmes: yes, sir. The chairman: so there was not only the concern with the ownership of the telecommunications companies, but past practice. Mr. Holmes: yes, sir. Congressman Heck, at that point, when you were hearing about this ambassador who was just whipping out a cell phone in Ukraine, calling the president, and there's 2 ends of this. The White House lets that phone call go through. What did the Republicans have to say in that room about the security of that phone call?
Okay, Lawrence, we're not talking specifically about what other Republicans said, except for that which you could find in your deposition. But the fact of the matter is that they have actually tortured themselves, turned themselves into pretzel, defending the president and trying to explain away in each and every regard what went on here. And it's no different here, and it's not going to be any different, I predict, when Mr. Holmes comes before the committee on Thursday. But at the end of the day, facts matter, and the facts are the facts, and America is going to have an opportunity to hear them firsthand. I want to put this a little bit into context, if I may, Lawrence. We are 2 hearings out of 7 to go. So for those of you who are Harry Potter fans, we're only at the end of book 2. We got 5 books to go, and everybody understands there's a lot of plot ahead. There's going to be a lot of revealing of information that bears upon this very important subject for America.
Congressman Heck, what could you tell us about what we should expect tomorrow?
Well, I think most importantly, America is going to get an opportunity to see a decorated war hero, Colonel Vindman, who, of course, is a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, serving in the National Security Council. He's the individual who immediately went to the council, the National Security Council's council, because he was concerned about both the meetings on July 10th and the phone call on July 25th between President Trump and President Zelensky. He is in fact, a decorated soldier. He was awarded the Purple Heart for injuries sustained in the Iraqi War, as I recall. And I think they're going to see the best of our country on display.
Jonathan Alter, to get to the security of this phone call, I just want to double underline that this president of the United States ran a presidential campaign on the security of communications of government officials, specifically Hillary Clinton's, in his view, lack of security in the way she handled her emails. I am one of the people who believed that at least some of the Republicans in the Senate and the House who were concerned about that were genuinely concerned about that. There is no reason to believe that any of them were concerned about that, since none of them are now concerned about the security of this phone call.
Right, it's just a hypocrisy fest. Remember, what was lock her up? What was she supposed to be locked up for?
It was about the security of the communication.
The server, right? That it wasn't secure. That's why all those folks at the Republican convention said she should go to jail.
Lock her up.
Now, the level of insecurity in that server pales next to making a phone call that is being listened to by phone companies that are owned by Russians. And on top of that, you know, I think there's some question why this obsession by Trump with, quote, investigations, investigating Biden. Why is he dropping everything else, dropping his golf game to call Sondland in Kyiv? Think back again to Hillary's emails That's how he got elected. He just said emails, emails, emails. She did something sleazy, emails, emails. And by election day, all the voters, many of the voters, were repeating back, oh, I can't vote for her because of the emails. What he wanted to do against Biden was to say, open-ended Ukrainian investigation of Biden's corruption. And he was going to say that till he was blue in the face all the way until the 2020 election. That was his ticket to re-election. And this is why this was so central to Donald Trump's efforts. And everything was about smearing Biden, because once an investigation's opened, it can stay open for at least a year, right? And he could say, my opponent is under an ethical cloud. That's what he wanted to do in this election.
Congressman Denny Heck, thank you very much for joining us tonight on this eve of week 2 of the hearing schedule. Very thick hearing schedule you have this week in the committee. Really appreciate it. Jonathan Alter, thank you. Noam Ornstein, thank you for starting us off. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.